Look at them out in the ocean. They're completely free. They don't have any technology, but they did. They were immersed in it also. Remember when they came down to the Dogons a long time ago, they came down in a spaceship. They were involved in UFOs and all the other stuff. They were part of the Lucifer Rebellion. But they made the decision at one point to break away. And about 200 years ago, they totally broke away, and they're still emerging out of it. Their planet's almost totally out of it. Sirius is almost totally gone, except for just the humanoid part, which is the part we saw up here. The humanoids are slowly turning into dolphins and dropping off, and they're almost out of, they've almost extracted themselves out of that whole pattern. And they're proof that it can be done. Yeah.
Well, you said that the Syrians are in Christ consciousness, and yet they're still...
They're on a very, very low level of it. They're
so the Lucifer Rebellion is has gotten into that.
The Lucifer Rebellion has got into a lot of areas. Anybody in existence that is involved in external technology is part of the Lucifer Rebellion.
It's a shorter list.
Huh?
It's a shorter list.
Oh, no. She said who isn't is a shorter list. It's the other way around. Who isn't is a greater list. Most people are not involved in it. The vast majority does not involve themselves in this kind of stuff at all. There's only certain levels that do, and we happen to be some of those people. Though it's a spectrum. It's not a day and night, black and white thing. There are people like the Greys who are 100% totally, absolutely, irrevocably connected to the technology. You know, the Darth Vader type thing that can't leave it, and have biologically linked themselves in so deeply that they can't leave it without dying. And then there's this whole spectrum going all the way through to people like the Syrians who are lightly into it, and to people like us who are lightly into it. We still have emotional bodies. We still are able to love and to feel. But we're immersed in this. We could extract ourselves from this, and we could get out of it and become free again. And we're not totally addicted to it. So it's everybody's on kind of different levels of addiction to all of this stuff. What?
I thought the dolphins knew how to create them.
They do.
I thought they traveled through it.
They do, now. But a few hundred years ago, they did it by growing their ships and creating these UFOs, that flying ships, that were external to them. They were involved in it also. It was the means that they were able to get through from Syria to here. It's this whole thing with their external the living field Mercatus is really relatively new to them. Considering how old they are, this is brand new. They've only been in it about 200 years, which is brand new. And they're not fully extracted. There is a part of them, which is the humanoid aspect, which on their planet they've got beings that look like that, and they also have beings that look like Akhenaten. They have humanoid-type beings here also, which live on the land part. And those are still involved with the technology, though they are trying to get out of it. They are really, really trying to get out of it.
But when we shift, they will shift. Shifting will occur for everyone. When we shift, they're going to...
Yeah, we're all linked together. If this shift happens that we think, it's definitely going to be...
We're all going to shift together.
Yes, we will. I believe so. I don't really see how we could not. So they are great examples for us because they've done it. They've got out of there. You can't imagine what level of existence they're on right now. And the joy that they've got going because they're free. They're completely free. They can just disappear out of the water anytime they want. And within just a 3-day period, end up back on Sirius and go back over there. It's just a little jaunt. Hang out over there and come right back again. They can move right through space. They can fly in space as well as in water. and they have no vehicle whatsoever. They just total understanding of the Merkaba. We could see their Merkaba fields in the computer screens when we were working with them.
Drumbelow, you spoke yesterday on the polluted oceans
Yes.
and the dolphins being evolved beings.
Yes.
What effect are they having on the oceans? More on a light aspect, and
Well,
on how are the polluted oceans affecting them?
the oceans are affecting them pretty strongly, and they see us, they know that we are the problem. And so this is the reason why they are trying to communicate with us and to help change the situation. The whales, for example, which are really the real powerful beings in this world, prior to about 1950 or so, 56 or whenever it was, no human being or country or anyone had ever captured a killer whale alive. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get the nets that could hold them. And suddenly, in 1 year, 6 of these killer whales just come up to the ships and sit there, kind of wag their tails, and allow themselves to be taken into captivity. And this was when they began, the cetaceans began to try to make communication with us and try to heal us through their examples and through their, the dolphins come up and all they do is just say, it's love, it's all love, it's joy, have a good time, and they're giving the example by themselves. And their examples are definitely affecting us. We're beginning to understand. I had a friend, Dr. Paul Spong, just to show you the dolphins really, the whales really, and the dolphins are in very high level communication. Dr. Paul Spong was trained in he was trained in a college to be a whale trainer, and he became the whale trainer at the Vancouver Zoo, and he started training this killer whale there. But then after about a year, he began to realize that the whale was training him. It became real obvious to him. He says, wait a minute, the whale's actually, having more influence on his life than he's having on that one. And the whale got him to tell him about all the whales that were being killed all over the world and started to influence him to stop the whaling in the world. So what did he do? He started Greenpeace. He was the founder of Greenpeace. He got the 6 people together. It's one table, which I got to introduce with each one of these people, and got them to go out and start this movement. And he went out on the ships, and he'd been arrested like 100 times. He'd go out on these ships and just start shutting down everything. And they'd arrest him trying to get him stopped. And they did. They eventually got stopped the whaling in I don't know how many countries. There's like lots and lots of countries that Greenpeace has stopped all of this on. And one day he came to me and he said, the whales told him, he says he believed that he was in direct communication with them telepathically, that he could just talk to them. He could tell them in his head to do any of the things that he wanted them to do in the water, and they would just do it. And he got to the place where he just knew that it was just like talking. And they told him that there was no such thing as an individual whale or an individual dolphin in the world, that they were really cells in a larger body of consciousness. And that communication occurred, that all there had to be, if there was a dolphin, there only needed to be another dolphin within a 1,000-mile radius. And that dolphin could communicate to the whole through that one. In other words, they did have a 1,000-mile limit in their communication. And this whale wanted to prove this to him. He says, I will prove to you that this is true. So he asked me if he could have my house. I had a house in 450 miles inland on this place called Kootenai Lake. And he says, can I borrow your house for the winter? So I gave it to him. And he went in and he was going to set up a sensory deprivation tank to float in there to get still enough to be able to make the communication, but he never even put it together. And So I came back a few months later, 3 or 4 months later, and he had removed a few walls in my house. It was a funny feeling, I'll tell you. And put these windows there that weren't there before and things. It was really beautiful, but it was shocking. And he had still not made contact. He said, I need more time, I need more time. And I said, well, okay. So, but I was there, you know, so we were all living together. Him and his wife was living there, and me and my wife were living there, and my kids. And about 2 weeks later, he used to have, though if anybody, who knows Dr. Paul Spahn? You know Paul Spahn? Yeah. He's got kind of short hair now, and he looks very kind of professional-like. But he used to have really long hair and a really long beard, and in those days. And he came into the room one morning after about 2 weeks, and he had shaved his beard off on one side of his head and cut the hair short on one side of his head. And I said to Paul, I know something's up. I'm sure of it. He says, yeah, I made contact last night. And he says, I'm sure that I did. I did it. And he says, they told me that I was going to be a large influence in the world in all of this, and that I had to look respectable. He says, so today is my transition day. So for that day, he walked around half and half, and the next day he shaved off the other side. And what they told him is the way they were going to prove it was, he said that he was to go to this bay north of Vancouver, a very specific spot, and he was to go there with video equipment and everything so that he could prove what was about to happen. And he was to tell his people, he had a whole group of people that worked with him, he was to tell them what was to happen so that there would be like no backing out of this whole thing. And that on a certain day, at a certain time, which I think it was 12 noon at a certain day, all the whales, of which there were about 100 of them, of the certain species, would come into this bay, would swim up to the shoreline, lift out of the water, and look him in the eyes. And that's exactly what happened. He went up there with about 30 people, and they put their microphones in the water and everything, and they sat around and they waited for this time. And sure enough, all these whales came swimming up to the shore, lifted out, and looked him in the eyes. And obviously, he was never the same after that. He started the Orca Lab, which was started in that very spot, and he's been totally been immersed into whale research ever since then, and on his own, not using through the governments or anything else like he did before. And he spends all his time, I taught him how to play the silver flute, and spends all his time out in canoes with him, playing flutes to them and communicating with them, that he's now learned how to do. And so the whales they have an extraordinary level of awareness. We can't really talk about it because when we later I'm going to try to tell you, when I talk about the electromagnetic spectrum and light and all these other kinds of things when we get into this, like right now, we're looking at just a little tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, which we call light, which we receive about 90% of our information from. And then you get a little bit of information from sound. And those two things, which is also another little tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, and those two things are where we get almost all of our input into the world. But the dolphins are 100%. They see the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which is a world you wouldn't believe if you could see it all. It's here. We're just about blind. Almost. We don't really see much. And so they're on another world, another dimensional level of experience that we're not there yet, but we will be. Dolphins are conscious breathers. They cannot, if they do not purposely decide to take a breath, they will die. They have no automatic breathing system in them at all. And And so they don't sleep like we sleep. In fact, they don't sleep. They have a different mechanism, which I guess I'll describe real quickly right now. When we go to sleep at night, first of all, we are either usually on the left side or the right side. It's hardly anybody's got both sides going on at once. We're usually on one side or the other, and of that side, we are maybe 5 or 10% of that side is functioning. 100% of one side and about 90% of the other side is unconscious. It's not functioning. So we're almost an unconscious being. But we're even more than that from a dolphin perspective, because what they do is they come into a circle, like I talked about with the whales when they go to sleep. They all point their noses together, floating on the surface, and they begin to rotate. And I'm not sure which way they rotate, actually. They begin to rotate around, and you said they would rotate counterclockwise, is that what you said?
Most of the time
Counterclockwise? Okay. And they start rotating counterclockwise. And then at one point, one of them takes a breath and goes in the water. And then followed by the next one, followed by the next one, forming this helical pattern as they're going down into the water. In other words, copying where they would be on the top of the circle as they keep moving down into the water. But as they take this breath and go down in, the dolphins have both sides of their brain on 100%. So even though they've got a brain that's about 350 grams bigger than ours, it's really a lot bigger than ours because they got the whole thing on. We're only functioning, we got a 1,500 gram brain, and that's functioning on about, I don't know, 30 grams or something. It's not very much. And so they start coming down in here. They turn off one side of their brain and leave the other side on. That's called sleep. And so they come down here, and then when they either get to the bottom or when they get back to the top, I don't know from the research that I read, I can't remember anymore. But when they get down at the bottom, where they turn this off, I don't know. They then start coming back up. As the other ones are coming down, they're coming back up, forming a double helical pattern. Coming back up until they match back up in the circle, and when they get to the top, let's say it's up there, they switch sides of the brain and come down and take it so that the other side can rest. So it allows one side to rest with every other breath. It's a very slow delta, you would say. If you know how delta and theta work. Delta's sleeping state is really, we're just going back and forth, turning off one side of our brain, turning on the other, but it's at a rate about like that. That's what we're doing when we're asleep. And they're just doing it much slower. And so when a dolphin looks at a human being, we're all sleeping because we have one side of our brain turned off.